order the planning board meeting for Tuesday, February 25th. First item we need to do is bring our alternate on as a voting member. So do we have a motion?
I'll motion to bring on. There's my microphone.
Motion's been adopted. Second? Second, Mr. Foster. All in favor? Unanimous. Our next item, approval of the minutes for the January 28th, 2020 meeting. Do you have any changes or?
I move that we accept the minutes as written.
Have a motion to accept the minutes, Mr. Roman. Second? Second from Jonathan. All in favor? Unanimous. Next item, zoning application 2019-705 APC Towers LLC. Request to modify maximum stealth tower height in the industrial district when adjacent to residential zone.
Good evening, everyone.
Good.
There has been no changes since the public hearing to the requested text amendment. And for those folks who weren't here at the meeting, the applicant is requesting to increase the height of the initial cell tower on I-1 districts from 80 feet to 120 feet, and these are adjacent to residential districts, and it's a stealth application. So the definition of stealth application is hidden or some type of tree structure. Again, this is one of two applications that the applicant has submitted. The first one is the text amendment. The second one is a rezoning that would apply to this text amendment. Any questions?
Questions from Mary Jo?
Yes.
Gary?
Thank you. Mary Jo, at this point in time, we talked, I think, at the public hearing about this, we only have one other zone that currently has this type of language in it, and that's a residential institutional RI?
Correct, that is the RI, and this is, this here is the section of our ordinance that references that. So here's the RI, it's 80 feet stealth, and then with the triple asterisk, they can, when in utilizing a stealth tower application, the above given height limits may be increased up to an additional 40 feet at the time of initial construction. So they'd have to do it as the first application. They could not install an 80-foot tower and then ask for the additional 40 feet extension.
Okay. And again, if I may, if we make this text change, it affects all of the properties that are in whatever respective zone that it is. So it means that this is a language that is applicable to all future applications of this nature in that particular zone.
All I-1 district
Initial
zoning
installations.
lands. Yes, anything that has an I-1 currently, or anything that would be zoned in the future to I-1, that would apply to that zoning classification. So this was an example. This is Town Hall right here, and then this is Matthews Mint Hill Road. So any of these properties could apply for that request.
If the amendment is approved. Okay, thank you.
Any additional?
Yeah, Mary Jo, can you scroll back up a little bit to the asterisk, the three? So it looks like, do they have to come before you guys for approval with the simulations?
They have to come to the town board for the site plan to be reviewed and approved.
So someone would be seeing these no matter what?
Correct. Correct.
And so right now, the way that's written is they're 80 feet, but you have to apply for the additional
80 feet is currently permitted,
40. Yeah.
and if they wanted to do 120 on the initial installation of the tower, they'd have to come before the board.
So we're approving the 8, if we approved, it would be the 80?
No, we're approving 120.
So 80's already.
80's already approved. So what they see here, this I-1, this is where it currently is, at 80 feet under stealth.
Gotcha.
Okay, there's the 80 feet under stealth. They're asking to move I-1 down here to have 80 feet permitted without going to the board, and then 120 to go to the board.
Yeah, that's, okay, that's right.
And we still would review the site plan and make sure it meets all the other requirements of the ordinance at 80 feet.
So the bottom line is it would still be up to the discretion of the board. On a case-by-case basis, even,
Not necessarily. If they meet the requirements of the ordinance, they would have to be approved.
That's my point.
any additional questions?
I'm sorry, could you go back over what that footnote is again, Mary Jo?
Sure.
And what it means?
Sure. So the first part says when a stealth application, so this would not just be a single pole, it has to be stealth, which means hidden in some form. They want to go above the height to increase it by 40 feet, so they're allowed 80, they would still be allowed 80, but if they want to increase it an additional 40 feet at the time of initial construction. They have to provide photo simulations and must show all exterior edges of the property, and then additional documentation such as cover batch may be provided. That's not a requirement. We cannot require that. Federal law doesn't allow us to require that. And then the site plan would be reviewed and approved by the town board.
And as it's written today, it's footnoted along with, is it footnote 2? As it's written today, up in the other section, without the amendment, it's up in the category that's
It's right here.
B3,
Right?
which is footnoted as well with asterisk 2.
No, asterisk 1, 80 foot.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Asterisk 1. So they could do, maybe increase by 20 feet for each additional use, co-locating on the stealth structure up to an additional 40 feet.
But does that not indicate at time of installation?
No. Does not.
So am I apologize that I'm acting confused because I am. It means that right now in that district, they can install an 80-foot pole and increment it in 20-foot increments?
Where there are existing non-residential structures that exceed the above given height limits. So it's non-residential structures. So if you read the first part of that, it says where there are
Got it.
existing non-residential structures,
Okay, great.
they can do that.
Any additional questions?
So the reason the higher cell towers because of lack of cell service, is that right? The dead zones fill in the gaps?
That's my understanding. The applicant is here if you want to speak to them.
I mean, so in those dead zones, are there homes and stuff there, roads, people there? Or is it just trees?
Well, hang on one second. There is some, so this will be part of the next part, is the rezoning. So this is just for the text
Oh,
amendment,
I
so
got you.
that applies to townwide, okay?
Okay.
So, when you're asking that question, it's not necessarily for the, this does not apply, that does not apply to this, okay?
Okay,
It's for the
okay,
next
okay.
part, okay?
And how many, I know we talked about this, how many other properties would this kind of fall into? There weren't that many, right?
any I-1
It's
zoning.
all I-1 zoning against residential.
Yeah, so on that zoning, just this parcel zoning map here, those are all those parcels. Now, most of these are developed, but that doesn't mean they can't be redeveloped. And there's I-1 parcels along Monroe Road. Those are mostly the areas that this section and Monroe Road, and this one's an outlier by itself out at the edge of Matthews.
Additional questions? Anybody have questions for the applicant?
Yes. I'd like to hear from you.
Suzanne Todd, attorney with Johnson Nelson Ward, here on behalf of the applicant APC Towers. Would like to point out that on this, what the proposed text amendment would change would be to allow an additional 40 feet when you've got I-1 property adjacent to residential. If it's not adjacent to residential, I think it's even more than 120 feet is already allowed in I-1 zoning district. You can see if you look at the I-1 zoning, this is when no residential district is adjacent. You can see right here that already 180, 200, and 250 heights are allowed. 220, I'm sorry, are allowed in that zoning district. And I think we did pretty extensive research and determined that there are about seven properties that are I-1 not adjacent to residential, or that are I-1 adjacent to residential that might actually be impacted by this. And then we did omit any property that was zoned in a CD, because it's unlikely that CD properties would include an allowance for a site, for a cell tower site. So again, the request, the text amendment is really limited to allowing an additional 40 feet for cell towers that are in I-1 zoning district adjacent to residential zoning. And again, we came up with about 7 parcels that were impacted. And then you've got to cull down and look at those and decide whether that's the highest and best use, whether that is something that could potentially, whether it meets other criteria like fall zones and other criteria to accommodate a cell tower site.
Additional questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
This one's probably, I'm not sure who this one's for at this point, but I share a little bit of Gary's confusion. So if this text amendment is approved by the full board, and someone else comes to us, another cell company comes to us later and makes an application for a cell tower adjacent to a residential neighborhood of 120 feet in height, that would result basically in automatic approval.
Yes.
Not subject to discussion by the board.
The board, I mean, the text basically says that, it's site plan to be reviewed and approved by the town, but it's highly unlikely, because it's listed as an approved use at that height, that they would have a hard time denying it.
There would have to be a very compelling reason.
Correct. Do you agree with me, Craig?
Mary Jo, before you sit back down, let me flip that question the opposite. If we do not change this text amendment, does any applicant have the ability to request a variance from this type of situation on height, or is that a hard
Variances for uses are not allowed.
for use?
That's a use.
Okay, so it's an all or nothing in that particular case?
Correct. correct. And Ms. Todd is correct. I mean, this is for next to residential properties, and I apologize if I didn't clarify that. But, you know, that, like, this is just an example, you know, these here could apply for one. You know, this is, again, this is Williams Business Park, but say they decided to sell and they wanted to redevelop it, and, you know, odds are that's not gonna happen in the next 5 years or 10 years, but those are, it's still gonna be in our ordinance, so.
I have a couple more questions for the applicant, if I may. Sure. Hi, thank you. First question, the height of the pole at 120 feet versus 80, what's the lowest point on the pole where you would have an array, an antenna array? Regardless of its height, what's the lowest point?
I'm gonna let Mike Gallagher with APC answer that. We also have
Great.
our engineers with TEP.
Thank you.
Hi, Mike Gallagher with APC. The tree canopy is at about 65 feet there, so the only red center that would be kind of commercially viable would be just above that, so it'd be like 75 feet.
Okay, and what's the distance?
That's the lowest, I'm sorry.
Right, so I'm interested, obviously, if the tree canopy is slightly higher than that, it doesn't eliminate or block the signal
It does.
completely? It
Well,
does.
not completely, but it knocks it down to the extent that the cell coverage shrinks massively.
Yes, I understand that it will degrade the signal
Correct.
on that basis, and I did not walk the site to know what types of trees they are, as to how dense they would be, and what that factoring is. Did you do any calculations regarding that in this exercise?
Okay, so the site is not again, that's the next
Okay,
application.
my apologies.
Okay, so, but it is on the report. We do have, they did do a survey, a tree survey for the next one.
All right. Good. One other general question then, as it might relate to a text amendment regarding cell tower poles. Are there alternative technologies that can be deployed to accomplish the same thing? Can we use distributed system arrays that are tied into cellular poles? Are there alternative technologies available today or coming that would benefit a cell tower application like this?
So there are systems, there's, for instance, distributed antenna systems, which are referred to,
Yes.
which would probably not work in this particular location due to the fact that you'd have to do a number of nodes throughout the area to gain that coverage. It would be very costly, would probably not provide the same coverage that we're seeking at this point. If you will, as an analogy, what we're trying to install would be the ceiling lamp in the living room, and the DAS would provide the table lighting, excuse me, the lamp lighting around the room. So it's really not a great tool for providing broad coverage.
I can add to that as well. Scott Brantley with Tower Engineering. But when you talk about DAS systems, they're strictly used for high-density areas. So what you're typically doing is they're used in combination with what we call macro towers, which is the taller towers and what's being applied here. So there's smaller DAS systems. The small cells are more for capacity driven, your shopping centers, your high density areas where these are covering a larger area. They work in combination together. So the smaller DAS systems that are localized help offload the macro towers from capacity. So,
Understand. Yeah. But again, there are alternative technologies that they may or may not be applicable for every installation and application as it relates to cellular. But there are other
Correct.
technologies, and they can coexist with pole-based systems. They have to be wired into them or connected into them in some way. I asked the question because I have to use a microcell at my house, okay? I get it, I understand. But there are ways to accomplish coverage if for any reason we don't change the text amendment to be above 80 feet. Either it's a less desirable location, but at least what happens in let's say, a number of years. I understand the cost complexities, and I just wanted to make sure I understood the deployment complexities. The last question I have would be, can these systems also be put on existing structures? If I'm not mistaken, this area has a variety of high tension lines, it has a water tower. Can't cellular systems be deployed in that fashion?
So there is a T-Mobile cell site on a Duke Energy structure right adjacent to the highway to the northeast. And that's the closest, well, there's a set of lines that feeds up in that same direction from the southwest. But because they're already on that structure, that's the closest, we can't reutilize that same transmission line of towers to accommodate the coverage over where we're trying to fill in. So it's just, there's not an existing transmission tower that's close enough to us to accomplish this.
Is this a topology issue?
Well, it's always a topology with cell coverage.
Mary Jo, I got a question. I want to kind of tally where you were going in abandonment. So technologies do change, and they will change. What are our provisions for cell tower abandonment?
We have it in our ordinance that it has to be a certain, and I don't have it here, but I can pull it up if you want me to pull the ordinance up. But there is a paragraph in our text regarding the abandonment of towers and the time frame and what needs to be done.
I was just saying, we talked about that at the town hall meeting, and I was trying to.
That's fine, no problem, repeat.
Well, but along that line, then, maybe we need to bring this up for a second. How do we define abandonment in our code? I mean, if a tower, how do we know?
It's a period of time, right?
Yeah, there's, in the FCC, if I'm not mistaken, you have to have those all listed in the FCC as list.
Frequencies are listed
They're
with the
registered.
FCC.
Yes, they're all registered.
Typically, if there's if the cell users, if the carriers withdraw from a tower for a period of years, there's a deadline like that's in the ordinance. I'm sure that's typical for most municipalities, and then that we'd be required to remove after that time period.
I have one kind of silly question, maybe. So I'm guessing the reason why we didn't have them, that tall within residential areas before was just because of aesthetics, I'm guessing.
Well, it's because adjacent to residential neighborhoods.
Right,
Yes,
right.
Yes.
Is
yes.
there any, and this is the silly part, is there any health concerns with having cell towers so close to residential areas?
So, when there was an application 5 years ago for a cell tower to be placed on Elizabeth Lane School, and I'm not sure how many of you remember that. We had a discussion that was, we called it Cell Towers 101. So we had a nonprofit person from Washington DC come down and explain that to everybody. And I know we still have those documents. I'd gladly share it with any of the board who wants to see it. It comes down to the raise up at 180 or 120 feet away from you. You get more waves from your microwave than you do from that cell tower.
I mean, I figured since we all have our cell phones on, it's 24/7, that probably isn't, but I just thought I'd ask.
And that closer to your ears, exactly, yeah.
Could be the reason my hair's falling out. Is that-
That's what, yeah, I was trying to let you know.
But then on the phone more than just old age.
As well as the FCC has set specific guidelines for these cell towers, and obviously we would need to comply with that.
Additional questions, comments?
I'll make a comment to this group. I'm not real comfortable with setting up a blanket text amendment that doesn't have the ability to be reviewed, especially next to residential properties. I just feel 120 feet is pretty darn high if it's not needed.
But the question may be, is it, and if you're looking, I mean, do you want us to, you got, but you do got a balance, right? technologies that are available, you know, and from a community standpoint, you have to look at it like that. I understand the other system part is that it's next to a residential, but yeah,
That's what
it, I saw theirs, and it looked like it's a really good plan. The question, you're right, is what about the next guy? Is that this one? I mean,
And not knowing, again, we're not just talking about this as a blanket. The text amendment says that anyone can come in, if this is approved, near a residential community and populate 120, up to 120-foot tall cell tower, stealth, all right, without a lot of disciplinary review because it's in the text that allows
yeah,
it.
I don't disagree with that.
And I just don't, again, the subjective nature is how tall is tall enough?
But they can already put up one that's 80.
80 is fine, because it's been that way. I'm not.
But if
I mean,
85 is not,
How
if
much
80
more
is.
offensive is a 120-foot one and an 80-foot one? I mean,
I would say in a residential community, 120 feet view is a lot easier to see than 80, especially over 65-foot trees. That's my concern. I don't have a good answer to that, Jenna, you're right. But my big concern is it's up there. It looks like some of these others you can drive down the highway that is
But I
not
think
close.
the issue is they want to provide cell service and they're not getting cell service on an 80-foot tower, so you want a little bit to get cell service to those dead zones.
Which is a benefit
I
on
don't
the
know.
other side, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
you're way
if
ahead.
you're complaining about not
I mean,
getting.
if there were no
phone
trees
or
at all,
you're
then
checking your
80 would be
Facebook.
offensive, right? And if there are no trees at all, I would want to spend as little money as I could and put up an 80. I mean, I think we're only doing 120 because that's the only thing that'll work. That's the way
Well,
I'm,
if the tree height is 65 feet and the lowest it can be is 70 feet, that's 50 feet less.
Yeah, but it's gotta go a certain distance though.
If
be
it's
the next
above
tower.
all of the
And
trees,
trees grow.
Right.
what's
And they're hills.
all I am saying is, I'm a minimalist in this process. I'd like that pole to be as short as possible or non-existent. Put it on towers, put it on water tanks, put it in a distributed environment, deal with it in other ways. If 80 isn't enough, what are we saying? Is
So-
120 enough? Is 150?
I mean, I think that's what we're going for.
Well, I'm looking at the text amendment.
I mean, it's
So
the
if
next
you're
text
talking about
amendment.
sorry.
No, that's good.
So, you know, if we're talking about the text amendment, you're also gonna think about costs. Like, someone's not gonna build a 120-foot tower if there's a structure there already that they're able to put it on. Do you know what I mean? Like, if there's an
What
eye.
80-foot would do, they would do.
Right, exactly. So like, if they're going into a spot, they're not gonna just put a 120-foot tower on a piece of land because they can't, you know what I mean? They're gonna wanna save the money and put it on I think that this would be their last option.
My concern about that, to be honest, is that I disagree. I think that every 10 feet is revenue for them. You know, I would not build a tower less than 120 feet and put one tenant on it. I put the first tenant on it at whatever's necessary, and I would lease those arrays as an operator to as many tenants as I can. It's all money.
So if I may,
I'm sorry. Hi.
no, I just had some thoughts about that. So from a cell tower owner's perspective, you're right, that, you know, additional carriers are money, but additional carriers on a single structure is also good public policy to eliminate the proliferation of multiple cell towers. Your point, though, initially, is that from a carrier's perspective, they don't want anything to do with a tower owner if they can find an existing structure to locate on. So we looked at all the, and our client did as well, at all the surrounding structures to see what was available for them to co-locate on. They examined those very closely for the same reasons that you cite, because it's so much cheaper, so much faster, so much easier to deal with than having to go through, for instance, a rezone. So it's just a better method for the carriers to go on a transmission tower or a water tank or whatever, but those weren't available to solve this need.
This may be a question for our next item on the agenda, but what is the stealth gonna look like? Do we have material?
Yes, there's photos.
that is for the rezoning.
And Mary Jo, would that be something that's reviewable then per each time they come in, what the tower looks like itself, or would that be?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because they would have to prove that it's stealth.
Right.
So you can't just put a pole up there. And so they have to make sure that it's hid in some type of form.
Additional questions, comments?
I do want to go back though to one thing. So there are only 5 or 6 properties that really meet this criteria. the rest of them are island anyway, non-residential, so they're under a different guideline. So we're really talking 6, 7 sites. That's,
Not all that are currently zoned I-1 could get changed and redeveloped in the future.
but they,
Any property that gets redeveloped can then put this text amendment is. I thought we're talking about.
this is Texas.
Those that are
That's all I'm
vacant
looking at.
I-1s today that could put this on as opposed to all the others that exist in town that could eventually do the same thing if it were redeveloped. There's a building on it today. It gets torn down. All right, if, I don't know, Family Dollar is one of those, anyway, if a building gets torn down and gets redeveloped, if it doesn't get rezoned, it gets open to, if it's near residential.
No, it has to be
I don't
adjacent.
care about I-1 everywhere else, and I'm not opposed to that. I'm just concerned about the fact that there's no distance limits here significant. Like, what's the distance that I-1 has to be, what's the buffer for an I-1 next to a residential, regardless of cell phone or cell tower? Just, what's the structure distance? 100 feet, 50 feet setbacks from the property line?
You're asking for the setback for a building?
For, well, anything, any structure that we would put on an I-1 zone.
They have 0, it's not that,
No, but that thing is the fall zone, so you can't put it that
Yes.
close to the edge of it.
120 feet is as close as it can be.
yes,
Think I
yeah,
can
they
see
have
it
to
at
have the fall
120
zone,
feet?
It would
which would
have
be
to
the.
fall on its property, right?
Yes, it's supposed to fall, technically, yes, it's supposed to fall on its property, and most of them collapse now. I've learned a lot over the years. So they do normally collapse. You do not see a lot of cell towers falling. It's more the aesthetic issue is what comes down to.
Still
The
required.
church.
Yes, the ordinance still requires the fall zone.
They lost the trees around the church, they lost the front of the church, but that stealth clock tower it stayed.
Additional questions, comments? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that I'll approach that with a comment too. I think all his comments are very valid.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. Two different ways of looking at this. It does bring more revenue for the carrier, I have no doubt about that. What the carrier is trying to do, my own opinion is, it's not just about the money, it's to improve the coverage in the market. And if I remember correctly, when we saw the coverage map at the public hearing, there was a significant improvement in coverage in Southern Matthews based on this new tower going in. So it helps the citizens of Matthews. I know I'm a fan of technology. I know in some cases you do things like this to improve technology. I don't think a 40-foot addition is a major issue. My only concern really is that I think it's fine in this area where the petition is. It may not be quite as fine in other places, but I think it's worth it to go ahead and approve the text amendment so we can get better cell coverage, which helps a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So based on those comments, I would like to make a motion that the requested zoning action is most currently amended as recommended for approval, has been found to be consistent with the Matthews Land Use Plan as follows. It allows for the integration of the stealth communication tower on any industrially, I'm not sure if that's a word or not, zoned site that will be of service to the community. It's reasonable because there are limited locations where a stealth tower can currently be located within the town of Matthews and will require co-location or additional antenna.
We have a motion from Mr. Foster, second from Ms. Reeves. All in favor? All opposed? Passes with Mr. Lamson opposed.
Okay, so, the second, application, public hearing was for
2019-708.
Thank you. And this is for change in conditions on a property located at, at 2447 East John Street. Again, there was no changes to the site plan, to the rezoning request, and I'll just briefly go over, again, the information from the public hearing so that you're familiar with it. The applicant is seeking to put in a 120-foot stealth tower on the property. This is the property, this is Habitat Restore, and the tower will be located approximately here. My mouse is too fast. This was the original rezoning. It showed four, here's the store, the Restore, and it showed four other structures being located on the property. So this is the reason for the change in conditions. Again, here is the cell tower approximate location on the site. They will have a fence around it. This is the fall zone area. They will meet the landscaping requirements for this area and fencing. They will have an easement back to the property, gravel drive. Again, here's another view of the site. And this is what the monopine will look like. And it will be 118 feet tall with a 2-foot lighting rod for the total of 120 feet in height. This is the land use plan that for this area, and the consensus plan did say that they would have office production and distribution on the initial development of that property. Here is the vegetative survey, and here's 3 trees that are large, that are 10 inches or greater, that will be removed. All the rest were smaller than that. So anything within this area and here will be removed. And that's the report. Any questions?
Mr. Foster.
Mary Jo, are there any homes back there, or is it just zone residential?
Yeah, there's homes behind there. There are homes adjacent to
Show us
it.
on the map where they are.
Sure, hang on one second. So these are zoned R12, and there's homes there are homes along John Street right there.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
I was thinking there was something further back, but those on.
There is a house here, and I think there might be one in here. Most of this is large vacant land. There's a lot of vacant land back in here.
I wasn't thinking about the homes on the front, because really I was thinking most of those have gone to commercial buildings now.
Yeah, and that is in Stallings jurisdiction, but that would not matter. Even if it is in the next jurisdiction, it still would be applicable if it was zone residential or a residential structure.
In this application, is there a tree save?
Yes, there is.
Yeah, go back to that last, keep pulling that right there. And the
Well,
bubble up at the top.
the bubble, yeah, that tells what the tree save is up here.
Yeah, it's directly behind the
The-
structure,
Mhm.
adjacent to the residential.
Did you hear him? It's right behind here. There is a buffer along here and here. So, let me see if I can show it on so see, these trees are all gonna be left. That's to there, and then this is to the back of the property line. The property line's right about here.
Thank you. Additional questions? Mr. Lamson.
Mary Jo, can we go back to the land use plan for a second? do we typically, when we define these uses, call out whether or not this particular application for a cell tower is in or out of the use plan? Would we have named that it is or isn't? Do we get that granular in when we define the typical uses? Because I don't see cell tower in any of that.
No, we don't. These are, this land use plan was done a couple of years ago, and it is consensus, it was adopted by the board, but, no, I don't, cell towers are not a consideration when we look at land use plans.
Okay, thank you.
Now, did you state that there were additional buffer or plantings going around?
It's what they're leaving. It's not anything that they're now, where the fences would be going in around the tower, which is required, there is a landscaping that is required there that staff will double review before they can build the structure.
Additional questions?
Just one, along that line, the landscape plan showed 6-foot shrubs,
Mhm.
the fence is at least 8 with barbed wire. Is that just our minimum, or is there an opportunity for those to be larger when they're installed?
So there's supposed to be 3 rows. It's supposed to be staggered, and I've already discussed that with the applicant, that it needed to be corrected.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Additional questions, comments? Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion. On zoning application 2019-708, APC Towers LLC changing conditions, I move that the recommended zoning action as most currently amended, recommend approval because it's consistent with the Matthews Land Use Plan as follows. It allows for a stealth communication tower on any industrial, am I reading the right one? On any industrial zone site that will be a service to the neighboring properties, is reasonable because the property is underdeveloped and is at the back of the property away from the public realm.
We have a motion, Ms. Reed. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Mr. Rowan. All in favor? All opposed? Passes with Mr. Lamson opposed. Our next item, request for reapplication, Home Depot, 1837 Matthews Township Parkway.
Sorry about that. It's tough when you're a one-man show. So, in December, the Board of Commissioners reviewed a change in conditions for the Home Depot, and the request was denied. The effect of the denial has the same conditions as if it was a regular rezoning, because it was a rezoning with just change of conditions. The Board of Commissioners can waive the 1-year requirement to come back to the board. So the Home Depot seeks to allow outside large equipment storage and display, and the currently approved plan does not allow such. So they're asking that the waiver be approved. And their reasoning is that they've talked and reviewed with Commissioner Urban, and they have also feel that with the new town board commissioners, it's a change in circumstances. So they're requesting, instead of waiting till December, that it be approved to have a waiver for planning board report, recommend a waiver to the council. The council has the final say in the waiver. The applicant is here. They did provide a general site plan with some changes noted. Now you are not reviewing the site plan. You are reviewing whether you feel that there are circumstances or conditions changed that should allow them to have the waiver of the 1 year.
Mr. Foster?
Even though we're not reviewing the site plan, we would need to take that into consideration, I think, because the only reason, my understanding is the board would reconsider this application in less than a year is there have been substantial changes in that plan.
The ordinance says substantial changes, change in circumstances. Substantial changes and/or something that could not have been foreseen before.
Like new board members. I reviewed the plan, and I don't see substantial changes. It looks like pretty much the same plan. And another thing, whether it's right to say this here or not, they never removed all that stuff after they were denied putting it there,
Correct.
which I think is a problem. And to come back at it just to ask the same question and hopefully get a different answer, I just don't think that's the right thing to do.
I think you might want to listen to, this is Adam Essing with Bowler Engineering, or Kimley Horn, excuse me. Sorry.
All good. And I'm representing Home Depot, so first wanted to just apologize for the inconsistency in the message my client has been sending. There seems to have been some confusion between their corporate, which is who we have direct contact with and work with a lot, and some of their local staff, and that's been made clear today after. And so I appreciate the town planning and the board for bringing some of the issues of that they hadn't moved all the equipment. I think there was a concern that recently some mulch was put out in front of there, so appreciate being informed of that so we can go back and let Home Depot know that they are not helping themselves in doing this. But we are committed to making sure that we express to Home Depot the, be very clear about the steps that they need to take to at least put it back in compliance, regardless of whether or not a change of condition is approved, to be meeting within the town's ordinances and code requirements. And in regards to the asking for the waiver for the 1 year waiting period, I think one of the biggest concerns, and the reason why Mr. Irvin and a few of the other board members disapproved the plan previously is because they didn't feel like there was really any screening or aesthetics that were provided to kind of enhance the look and feel of the parking lot. So that was kind of the main topic of our conversation with Mr. Urban, and he was, at least verbally in our one-on-one meetings, supportive of coming back. And although I don't necessarily know that the screening that we've proposed around the equipment in the parking lot is what's going to get approved, we're just trying to show a good faith effort of, here's a thought, and would, engage in board members and listen to the comments from planning board and council, should we be given allowed to go back through the process again earlier than December, so.
I agree with Mr. Foster. It doesn't seem like there's been any changes or other than agreeing to put some screening around it. Do you know if corporate or if the Home Depot here plans on making changes?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I think they're willing to consider whatever will be approved, and at this time, that's not really fully known, but they're absolutely willing to negotiate and understand kind of to what level they would have to go with screening. We've discussed, more fence type screening or planter screening. One of the discussions was maybe breaking up the equipment in different pods around to kind of ease the look of that. Again, we really haven't sort of dialed in on exactly what that is, but they, understand that it would have to be, something that is amenable to both planning board and council to even be approved, and that it's they're not going to come back with basically the same plan and just get a different answer at the end. So.
Mr. Lamson?
Mary Jo, as I understand it, this would be a brand-new application. So we would go through the entire process we would normally go through, which means it'll go to public hearing. It'll then come to us if the board refers. We get to start over.
Yes, it's a brand-new application.
So we're simply discussing whether we want to give them a second chance or a third chance. And the opportunity will still exist for all of us to have input into our perspective of whatever that plan.
Correct. Without that, we go and tell them, remove all the equipment, remove everything out front,
No,
and we're done.
Got it, okay. But if let me make a comment, because I went by the site, and in fact, I mentioned to Mary Jo, the problem we have right now with the seasonal mulch and so forth, is it's occupying 20 of the parking spaces closest to the building, is you have made some efforts already. The large equipment that used to be out there has been moved to the side. There have been some things that appear to be done, but there's still a lot of work to be done. There's a large amount of debris around the building that's precious real estate that could be used. There are still vehicles parked where they shouldn't be. I would encourage you, if you given the opportunity to go back through the application process, that somebody really sits down and goes through and tries to think of all the possibilities and takes the input that they can. The other thing I would ask is, you have the individuals who are responsible for managing the property daily to be part of that proposal process. No disrespect, but we've been talking to third parties throughout this, and today we find another violation from what is in the existing plan. The only people that I believe that can manage that process is the person that runs that store. I would like to see them involved either in person or in writing and in some way represented in the discussions if we go through this again.
Understood.
Thank you.
Additional questions, comments? Just to review before I ask for a motion, the only thing we're doing is giving them the opportunity to come back with another proposal.
You go to the
Board, and come to us and to the Board of Commissioners.
So, yes, we need a report saying that circumstances have changed or you feel comfortable. That goes to the commissioners for their March 9th meeting, and then they will make a determination if they agree to the waiver.
so they still.
Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we grant a waiver to the one-year waiting period for this Home Depot application to allow them to come back through the town's application process to enhance and modify their existing site sometime here in the next 30 to 60 days.
Motion from Mr. Lamson, do we have a second? Recommendation.
Recommendation.
Right. Second, Jonathan, all in favor? All opposed? Passes with Mr. Foster in opposition.
Can I make just one other comment, and I apologize, I don't mean to be beating up the horse. I think Home Depot provides a great resource for the town. The equipment or all of the uses and everything that's there at the store is valuable for a lot of the businesses around here and the homeowners. I'd love for this to work out. I'd love to see you get as creative as you can. But it's an eyesore as it exists. Yes, you have limited real estate to work with, but I really would encourage you to come back. The town wants this store, or at least I believe we need it in and functioning properly. Thank you.
Lastly, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Jonathan?
Can I oppose?
You want to ask?
Do you have one more question?